of the Finance and Facilities Committee of the Waukesha Board of Education to order. First up is verification of meeting properly being posted.
Yes, it was.
Excellent, thank you, Mr. Clark. Now we're at the section of our meeting where there is an opportunity for citizens to speak. Each individual will be limited to 3 minutes time to speak in order for us to hear from the community and then get on to the agenda of our meeting. We will signal the speaker at 2.5 minutes in order to allow a wrap-up of their comments. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language in any manner, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board or committee meetings. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience, and that the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your cell phones. Speakers are here to address the board and not the audience. Up first this evening is Diane Voigt.
Good evening. As a former member of this committee, I'm appealing to you tonight to use your heart as you make two decisions. First, the review of the free breakfast survey. If the purpose of this survey is to identify the need and potential participation at the 8 schools where no breakfast program has been offered to date, you do not need to spend another month data gathering. Last week I discovered the spring break bag distribution for Blessings in a Backpack. I was wondering how many students were taking advantage of the Blessings in a Backpack opportunity that's been available for all schools in the district. And this was the first time that I've seen the numbers of students involved, because they had a mailing to say who wants to volunteer to deliver to each of the 13 schools and the number of bags that need to be delivered to them. When I saw the numbers, I was really surprised. Specifically for the schools that we're looking at, that aren't being served with breakfast, Bethesda, 286 bags. Rose Glen, 120 bags. Randall STEM, 205 bags. Summit View, 228 bags. So that many students are opting in to receiving free weekend supplements. And would they accept free breakfast if it was offered? I think that's the answer to your survey, just knowing those numbers, because that's the process. At the beginning of the year, everybody gets a bag, and then the parents can say, I don't want it. You can opt out and not receive it. But now, this far into the year, that's how many are still receiving that service. It's a total of 1,207 bags at the 7 schools. And I think the members that are receiving the free blessings would be an indicator of what your survey would say. There's no need to delay another month when we can begin immediately to offer these kids a healthy breakfast to fuel their day for learning. Next, our topic is one I've spoken about before, and that's the closing of Whittier in just 6 weeks. We heard for the first time at the end of January about the potential closing. And at that first meeting, about 100 were present on February 3rd over at Whittier. They had so many questions that were unanswered because it was too early in the process to be able to know how to answer the kinds of concerns that they were going to be raising. By the time we got to the third listening session, it was a much smaller group on February 24th. And at that point, the principals, Brandy Hart and Mike Elliott, did an amazing job of presenting what they could see this merger looking like. And I think what we need to do is to give you a chance to be able to hear more about what she has to say, give more time to making the decision. Because truly, the time that you have, just 6 weeks is not enough to know the impact it's going to have on all these kids.
Your time is up.
I have my extended comments, which were abbreviated because of the time limit, if you want to take a look at them. So I'll send this around for you for,
Excellent.
I thought I was going to have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Diane. All right, next up is Monica Whaley.
Good evening. I'm here today to voice my disappointment and astonishment at the speed in which the decision to merge 2 elementary schools has taken place. In all my years of teaching in this district, I have never seen anything move as fast as this action. Why are you pushing so hard, so fast? What are you hiding from us? Is it a deadline that you need to meet? Is there an offer on the Randall STEM building that we have no idea about? The responsible action is to stop this push. Slow down and examine all the solutions. You keep talking about fiscal responsibility, and in the long run, and now you jump on this action. The letter sent to parents regarding the merger went out late January, and you want to vote on this Wednesday, March 9th. Why? You demand due diligence from your teachers, responsible decision-making, and fidelity. Where is yours in this decision? If saving money is so important, explain the $325,000 lost in SSO reimbursement, the top-heavy administrators and their salaries. Teachers aren't even getting this CPI increase. What about student safety? Elementary students having to walk almost 4 miles a day to school through dangerous areas and in Wisconsin winters. What about student success? Doubling class sizes for students who are already struggling? Students who are exhausted from just getting to school? Ask any teacher how detrimental those practices are. The decision of this board and administration in the last year have been disastrous. Our district is notorious for making reckless decisions. For example, conveniently removing mask mandates just prior to the prom and sports playoffs, and not considering the health of our students and staff. Removing signage and welcome and inclusion signs for marginalized students who are being harassed and bullied. Not feeding breakfast to all students in the district. Stop the survey. It's just a delay tactic. And then you don't vote on it until April. How much time is left in the school year to feed these students? And now pushing a merger of two of the most economically disadvantaged students, age students, and those with special needs. Please tell us
30
how your
seconds.
decision is helping our students and our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Next up is Dave Richmond.
Arrogance, ignorance, or plain incompetence. Not one of these are an acceptable answer. A survey form that seems to be dragging along, we're going to take it to here and there, but let's review, shall we? The athletic directors have been in 3 times. That seemed to get speed rushed, but a survey to feed children, students, mind you, we're going to drag our feet on it. Ignorance, or arrogance, ignorance, or incompetence. The SSO plan clearly lists it's an open plan, no strings attached, 2 meals, period. Why are we dragging our feet on $325,000? Doesn't seem that important, or we don't have a need for it? I surveyed college professors, both inside and outside the state, numerous friends and people. They would have been packed up and sent out the door if a $325,000 in money had not been applied for. Because not only would that person have lost their job, other people in their department would have lost their job as well. In the public sector, you're packing your box by lunch. It's unacceptable. $325,000. And then you're insulting our ignorance, insulting our intelligence. Makes a big difference what I'm saying. By delaying the survey. But yet, board members asked to have space examined here. No one brought that up in meetings, but somehow that got time spent. Time that could have been spent talking about how do we get breakfast to 8 schools. If that number was 1, or whatever number Diane gave, which I stopped keeping track because I'm so infuriated, there is no excuse for breakfast not being served. It comes with no strings attached. Period. Not, well, I was voting on this. Nope, say nothing.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Thank you. Just want to make sure everyone hears me and understands. Now, for the Hatfield merger, so the CEO who decides that we don't need $325,000, he's done the projections for all of this, correct? Savings of $900,000 per year. But once we start adding up the grants, $500,000 in potential needed
30
repairs,
seconds.
this should be delayed. I've spoken many different occasions. This should be delayed. There is money there to be had, and this shouldn't be a rushed decision. A bunch of community members went out and walked 1.9 miles. There's a lot of questions that parents have. And I'm guessing no one's really walked it in this room. I could be wrong at this board table, and I'll take a couple more seconds since I was interrupted.
Your time is up.
The Hatfield merger
Finish up, Dave.
needs to wait. I will.
Okay.
Hatfield needs to wait. There's plenty of reasons, and there's money available. Please take a look at the overall opportunity.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Sarah Harrison.
Hello. I come before you to speak about a few different topics tonight. The first topic is that I want to wish you all a happy National School Breakfast Week. Something to be celebrated except at 8 of our schools. As far as the survey goes, there was no survey needed to feed the children in any of our other schools. There's no survey needed to get the money to feed the children in these 8 schools, so let's just do it. There is no financial reason, there is no moral reason to reject these free breakfasts that can feed the children. So I ask you, if you do vote for that survey, to let us all know why we need this survey when we did not need it for the other schools. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2, I would like to speak to you about the closing of Whittier and merging into Hatfield. I've come before you with some of these statistics again, but just as a refresher, as a total district, when we look at our economically disadvantaged population, is 37.5% of our population. When we look at our elementary schools, the 2 schools with the highest level of economically disadvantaged students are Whittier at 79.5% and Hatfield at 77.3%. This is an important decision that is before you right now. You can do the quick fix, which affects fewer kids and makes communities within our neighborhoods within our community have a long-term impact by pushing those neighborhoods together. Or you can take your time, redistrict to spread these children throughout the district, affect more people for a shorter time. I ask you to take your time, make an informed decision, and redistrict for our elementary schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up is Kelsey Draves.
Good evening, everybody. So tonight I'm actually going to speak on behalf of someone who can't be here. Her name is Mitzi Trujillo. She's a mother of a student that goes to Whittier Elementary. Here's a picture of us at the farmer's market this summer, and here is our kids all together. So she couldn't be here tonight, but she had some words that she wanted to say, and I told her that I would read for her. So my name is Mitzi. I have a son, Guillermo, who is in first grade at Whittier Elementary, and a daughter, Mila, who will be going to 4K next year. A board member on this Board of Education recently had said that he didn't think that the listening sessions were well attended and that he didn't think that many parents cared about the closing of Whittier Elementary School. Just because we didn't go to the listening sessions doesn't mean that we don't care or that this doesn't matter to us. We have to work. We are single parents. We don't have childcare. We have night classes. There are many different reasons that we personally couldn't attend. You don't have children that are going to Whittier or who this will affect directly. It hurts me that you want to close a school where the majority of the children are low income and combine it with another school full of low income children. Low income children already being Low-income children already begin school behind other children who have better opportunities. Children who live in poverty often arrive at school without having enough sleep or without having breakfast. Often they experience family violence, abuse, secondhand smoke, abandonment, and poor clothing and footwear. Now that we're joining these two schools together, there'll be many more children in one school, and teachers won't necessarily have the opportunity to see if children need help. Whittier has helped my son Guillermo a lot. The teachers have taken time to teach him and understand the problems that affect children outside of school. Do you really think that closing these two schools is the best, or closing one of these schools is the best idea? Guillermo has had lovely memories at this school and has made so many friends. He was even Student of the Month at one point this year, which is very cool. He loves Whittier very much. As a Hispanic mother, I want the best for my children. My son and daughter deserve a future, and having many children in one school is as though you are sealing the door to their futures, making them just one in the crowd. I believe that all children at Whittier School, no matter their race or background, deserve the American dream, the better education. They are the future. My son and daughter deserve the opportunity, and combining and closing a school is not the answer. Guillermo and Mila can go to another school, but it'll be just like starting over from scratch. I think you don't really understand because this won't affect you or your children directly as parents. We are supposed to be Waukesha strong, but what about in education? Every family has different situations. Does the opinions of the low-income families in this community even matter to you? Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Robin.
So thanks. Before I speak, I'd like to disclose that the actions and the words that I expressed tonight are those of mine alone and not my employer. I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Mr. Como, I'm going to speak directly to you as well as Mr. Montijo. So Mr. Montijo and Mr. Como, I went back and rewatched the August board meeting. I think it's the 5th time, but I wanted to make sure I was prepared because I was here the last 2 meetings, and I wanted to make sure I got all my facts straight. So Mr. Montijo, I just want to make sure after you had said for us taxpayers to put our money where our mouth was, you also said stay focused, let's stay focused, fix this plan, and keep us accountable, was what your words were. Mr. Como, at that same meeting, after you hit your gavel for about the 5th time, because it was a very long meeting, you asked administration in that meeting to please review the plan that had been in debt for decades, because, as Mr. McCaffrey had stated, there was some tardiness in getting the forms in, and we wanted, Mr. McCaffrey asked to get the forms in and to look at the plan as a whole to make sure how the plan was administered pre-COVID still made sense. Now, I'm paraphrasing that, but you did ask. That was a directive to administration to do that. So it's March. Hasn't been done. So you just told the gentleman you could hear him. So I want to make sure you can hear me. It's March, 9 months later. You asked administration to do that, and it has not been done yet. So tonight, if you could, to Mr. Montijo's words, if you could please explain to us as a public who's accountable for not bringing that to this committee. Okay, secondly, I'm a statistics guy. I was the guy last month that did the stats, right? So I'd like to know, and it's to Ms. Reinachek's comment. You brought up an excellent point, Mr. Montijo, you seconded about waste. I call it excess, but you called it waste. I'd like to know how many community members, churches, food pantries, blessings in a backpack, reach out to administration, because I know they have, to see what they could do about your word, the waste, my word, the excess. What has this administration done to come to you folks to see how you could administer the excess better? Could you partner with the food pantry? I don't know if that's able. Could you give it to the people of Waukesha to help? Could you give it to athletic participants at games instead of doing concessions? Could you pass that out? Has anybody talked about that? So it's an idea. To Mr. Montijo's point, I'd like to hear who's accountable for that, because it's a great point. If there's excess, how can we distribute it? 2 more things in 35 seconds. So I looked at the DPI scorecard from 2021.
30 seconds.
And 37.5% is the number on the report card for economically disadvantaged. That's what it says on the scorecard. Same number, Bethesda that year, 38.1% is economically disadvantaged. How is it possible, if you've looked at the data, that Bethesda is not receiving breakfast and or a snack per the SSO program? So I'd like you guys to hold whoever's accountable for that tonight. And lastly, and most importantly, we need to get the SSO program administered correctly. You voted on it.
Your time is up.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Robin. Next up is Paul Reese.
Good evening. Let's look at the due diligence of our teachers and our teachers union. Number of students failing one class or more in 2019 at Waukesha North was 54. In 2020, that number rose to 292, an increase of 440.7%. In 2019, Waukesha South had a total of 135 students failing one class or more. And in 2020, that number rose to 387 for an increase of 186.7%. This was brought to you by the best and the brightest in this room. I mean, we have Diane Voigt here, she was one of them, Greg Dietz, let's see, Amanda, and no, Bill Baumgart's not here either. They're the ones that are responsible for this. You can go back and listen to the YouTube videos when this board was out and meeting on Zoom, and the praise from these individuals, how great this was working for our students, that we were on top of it, that our students were getting everything that they deserved out of this. Well, they got it all right. This was exposed by a parents group, and once that happened, then all of a sudden the tunes changed around here. But until then, our kids came second and the teachers union came first. And they did not want to go back to work. They do not want to do their jobs. The ones that don't want to, I could give a rat's behind about. You know, I do care about the people who want to teach our kids, but the people responsible for doing this to our children do not want to teach our kids. They have no care or concern for the future of this country or these children's future whatsoever. They are so concerned about how they're doing emotionally, and whether or not they're going to be fit to go on in this world is completely irrelevant. I work with guys who they come in there, they have no clue if you tell them how to do something, how to read a tape measure and that. And they're trying to become machinists in that. It's just a farcical what I see coming out of our education. And I would really like to see a voucher system so that we're not tied to this, that my property values aren't tied to these failing schools, that anybody, even the poorest people, can find a school that they want to go to, and that their property values in a failing district are not tied to that school, that they are free to move to where they want to with their kids and get a decent education for all the children. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is Sam D'Amico.
Good evening. First off, Mr. Como, as you of all people here should know, I think what you did earlier during Dave's comments was unacceptable and inappropriate. Good evening. First off, with the survey, I think that this has been an issue since near the beginning of the school year, November, December, January. Why we're focusing on a survey now is going to be put on the agenda. We're focusing on a survey now to delay the process even more, because the last thing you guys want to do is give breakfast to 8 schools. Lunch was a political issue enough. I'd like to reiterate comments that I made at the last T&L committee that I will once again say here and expand on just a little bit. You are not able to interpret a motion. You vote on the motion presented, not on the motion you wanted to hear. The motion for the SSO school lunch program made by Mr. Baumgart and seconded by Mrs. Roddy and voted in favor by Joe Como, Greg Dietz, and Patrick McCaffrey, in addition to those stated before, stated that, and I quote, "provide lunch and breakfast for the 2021-2022 school year," end quote. No mention of the 8 schools not receiving breakfast, and no mention, to quote Darren Clark, how we've always done it. Well, the answer of "that's not what I thought," given by Mr. Como, is not going to cut it, and is not an excuse to not give breakfast to 8 schools. To go back to the Whittier-Hadfield closing plan, why are you going to pretend to care about fiscal responsibility if it's not only too much to feed kids, but get $350,000 into your fund balance for the food program to do so? We are losing money not giving lunch to 8 elementary schools, and yet day after day after day, the best thing you can do is put a survey on the F&F agenda. Now, for the TNL committee that I brought up earlier, the Whittier-Hatfield closure plan was not on the agenda. We were told that English phonics will get more time and math will change. That does not tell us the instruction that will be going on at Whittier. Nobody on this committee or in administration has any idea on what will be taught at Hatfield with Whittier kids going into the school, with English phonics getting more time and math changing. So nobody here knows what is going to happen, and yet you are expected to vote on it on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Is there anybody else that would like to address the committee who was not signed up? Anybody? Okay. Alrighty, moving on with the agenda. Next up is the action item section, and first up is the approval of the minutes from the February 7th, 2022 meeting. You're looking for a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Montiel. Is there a second? I'll second. Oh, Ms. Ryanchek will second. Any discussion? Yes.
Just clarification.
Yes.
The minutes that were at the desk, is that what was approved? Because there were a couple changes?
Yes, that's what we'll be approving.
Okay.
This,
Want to make sure.
the amended. Any discussion on the minutes from February 7th, 2022? No? Seeing none? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? 5-0. Next up on our action items is approval of the vouchers.
There were no questions this month?
Okay. Does anybody have any questions currently? All right, are we looking for a motion for approval of the vouchers?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Ranchak. And a second?
I'll second.
Montiel, thank you very much. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you. Next up on our action item is the approval of the food service program survey.
Yeah, per the request of the committee, we've brought back a draft survey that we would like to have the committee and then the board review and provide feedback on before we send it out to families, if that's the board's directive. So it's in board docs. I don't know if you want me to read, or can we project?
Oh, that's good.
Put it up on
Yeah.
the screen so everyone can see it. So it has 3 questions and then a kind of a, if you need more information, provide your contact information, and there's a comment section as well. We did have school perceptions eyeball these questions just to see if they read well and were clear. So the questions as they stand now, choose your schools of attendance. Again, that's so we can sort the data. If a free breakfast program was offered at your child's school, would your family utilize it? 3, if a family paid breakfast program was offered at your schools, your child's schools, would your family utilize it? We provide the pricing just to give some context to the cost they would be incurring. And then, again, if they would like any more information related to our food service program, there's a place for their name and phone number so we can reach out to them. And then comments at the bottom. So that's what we came up with, and looking for direction from the committee on how you'd like to proceed or edit or what.
Any discussion on the survey, questions? Ms. Ranchak.
Thank you. I would just like it to read a little differently in the second paragraph when it says currently federal waivers allow for school meal programs to be offered at no cost to families. I would make an amendment to say that currently federal waivers allow for school meal programs to be offered at no additional cost to families at this time. Then on number 2, the second question, instead of saying if a free breakfast program was offered at your child's school, would your family utilize it? I would have it say if a breakfast program was offered at your child's school at no additional cost to families at this time, would your family utilize it?
I'm sorry, Ms. Radicek, can you say that last one once again?
Yes. Strike the word free. So if a breakfast program was offered at your child's school, then just going back to the paragraph, the amendment of the paragraph, at no additional cost to families at this time, would your family utilize it? So basically, just repeating what was said earlier in the second paragraph.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to go a different route, just to give people a little history of how we got here this evening. Last May and June at the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting, Mr. Clark asked for the board to decide the future of the food service program for the 21-22 school year. He had made the decision the year prior to, and he felt that it was important enough to bring it to the board to have input and make that decision. And really, the job of administration, we all know, is to implement, not interpret the board-approved actions. And if there is questions with that, I think to ask the board for clarification and clarity. And if not, I think that leads to mistrust. We have 8 schools currently not receiving the free breakfast program. Those include Meadowbrook Elementary School, Summitview Elementary School, Bethesda Elementary School, Rose Glen, Hillcrest, Prairie, Randall STEM, and also Saratoga STEM. Yet, if a child attending one of these schools has siblings at a middle school or high school, they receive the free breakfast. And we've also learned that federal funds can be used to enhance the offerings at breakfast and lunch to make them better quality. So we can use the funds from the program that we receive to enhance what we do offer and make it more attractive and more received or better received by our students. We know that someone at central office also added information to each of the school sites on their websites that breakfast is not offered at these particular 8 schools. And then there was no additional communication to parents at these 8 schools explaining why the decision was made by administration. If the survey that I see in front of me was for 2022, 2023, I would be all for it. This survey is due the 25th of March. And I guess I would just like to know the rationale for having something that's been going on all year delayed another month, and then the survey window closes during spring break. Just other things, we've talked about the funds that have been lost, and every day that's just drip, 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 more funds being lost, when we obviously have ways that we can productively spend that money. And then why the needless, intentional delay tactics that clearly state that this is not a priority of our administration. As one of our news outlets reported, this seems like it should be a no-brainer. Why then, Dr. Siebert, are you allowing students from these 8 schools to go hungry each day? Going against a board vote, which was 5-4, and allowing us to lose in excess of $325,000. In the meantime, our students are relying on our PTAs and PTOs and staff to continue to fill this void on a daily basis. We also asked and received a lot of input from community groups that were willing to participate and help us deal with our long-term food issues in our district and to partner with us. And to date, I don't think that's happened. And that was in September. If that hasn't happened, I couldn't imagine how the groups have volunteered to bring forward their time and efforts and their ideas are feeling at this time. So I'm personally against this. I think it delays, it kicks it down another month for no reason. And I just don't see the rationale behind it.
Do you have any comments on the changes, Greg?
The only change I'd recommend would be that it would be for the 2022-2023 school year.
Okay. Any other discussion regarding the survey? Mr. Como?
I'm confused, Greg. You asked to have this be done, and so now you don't want it done? I'm just trying to understand.
So I asked in February, 2 times at the Finance and Facilities Committee, 1 time at the board meeting. Shame on me, I guess, for not following up and asking for a commitment from administration to give me a date that it would be sent out. So here we are, another month, just sitting here, nothing being done, and then it being kicked down the road again for another month. So if it would have been done, I guess like I assumed, in February, and we'd have the results today to act on that, then I think that would have been a whole different story, but it wasn't.
So when we ask anyone to fill out a survey and we get the data back, we can use that for however long we want. So whether it's viewed as immediate and/or for next year, I mean, the information I think would be potentially useful to know.
Ms. Reincheck?
Thank you. And also the timeline, when we ask administration to do something for us in a committee, and to report back to us with that information or to just follow through, they usually do that within the next meeting, so that brings us to here. So it's March. So you asked a few times in February at the February meetings, so it's not April, they did it the next meeting. So here we are with your survey that you asked.
And I don't think it was specifically clear that the survey would be brought to us in February. I guess I just assumed it would be done. I don't know what it takes. I mean, administration doesn't ask us to micromanage or to be involved in every single decision. I'm not sure why this would be the case for this particular survey.
My assumption is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, but Darren made a comment a couple meetings ago that he made the decision for a food service, and my assumption is he's going to have us make the decisions now because he took quite a beating for that. So that would be my guess, and that's why I feel comfortable with the board approving it, so that everybody knows who voted to send the survey out and who didn't. When you say I made the decision, because the question was actually asked of Darren, who made the decision, he said I made it, and he took a beating. So now we're making a decision in this committee. So that's why it's up. That's why it didn't go out. If it would have been okay for Darren to make a decision, I would have said make a decision, Darren, but the beating that he took, we're making a decision now. So,
I guess.
You know what I mean?
I hear you, but
yes.
I don't agree.
You don't have to agree, but you understand what I'm saying.
Right.
Right.
But in the meantime, kids are going hungry every single day. And
Well, no, I completely understand what you're saying, Greg, and you know me.
Yep.
Okay. But that's why, you asked the question, why are we doing it at a committee, and why isn't the administration making the decision? That's why.
But they could have. Administration could.
Well, they could have, yeah, they could have.
And they chose.
And then if somebody didn't like the results of the survey, then they would have been beaten up about making the decision to send the survey out with any board input.
Right.
Right.
Even though it was voted on 5-4 in August to implement the seamless summer option, which includes breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, they probably still would have been beaten up about it. If they decided to send a survey out and someone didn't like the survey that came back, they would have been beaten up about, they made a decision to send a survey out with any board input.
I'm just saying I don't think there was a need for a survey.
Oh, no, I understand. But you did ask for the survey, and what that trigger was for me was we're going to discuss it because the administration had made a decision that people didn't like. You included. So we're making the decisions about the survey now. That's the simple answer of it. It doesn't go beyond that. That's why. I'm just answering the question that you asked.
Yep. And I just assumed that we wouldn't have to micromanage that, and we would be able to have administration send that out and have the results.
Right, no, I understand, totally.
That's just.
But we can't pick and choose what we're micromanaging. Either we're going to allow them to make a decision and not beat them up about it, or, you know what I mean? So.
I hear you.
It goes both ways. We're either micromanaging, or we're not, or we're giving approval, or we're not. So that's why this is here. Anything else that's being decided upon, that's a different issue. But the question that you had was, why are we going through this? That is why we're going through it. Because of the drubbing that the administration took, because they said they made a decision about the food service program.
Right.
That's why we're doing it.
And I guess I just see delaying it another month. None of this is going to be done this school year.
Yep, point taken, for sure. All right, Mr. Montiel.
Thank you. As to the issue at hand, the content and wording of this survey, I think it's fine. It identifies the two groups I think we seek to identify. I appreciate Ms. Reinachek's proposed amendments. I think they make it even clearer. I think when the survey does come back, we'll be able to see, I think without much dispute, who wants the free, quote-unquote, free program and who would offer or would take advantage of a paid program. So it'll help us make an informed decision. As to the ultimate issue of when the board itself should make the decision whether or not we do offer quote-unquote free breakfast at those locations, I'd rather have it be done sooner than later, but it's a process that we're working through and got to follow the process, for lack of a better explanation. So, yeah, I think the survey, the wording is fine with me. It's clear, it's concise, and we should get pretty good.
The change in the wording or?
The change, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ms. Reinachek suggested, yes.
Do you want to vote on a wording change?
Do we
have to? Because we haven't.
I think if we get a consensus here.
Okay.
Prior to a motion.
Prior to a motion to
Yeah.
approve?
And
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a problem with changing the wording. I mean, the wording doesn't change the meaning of any of the sentences, which is always my concern. It's just to put in a different, explaining it a little bit different, so I don't have a problem with it. Greg, we know, and so, Mr. Como.
yeah, I agree that I think it's more precise with Karen's suggested changes. I'm not the person who developed the survey either. I guess I would turn to either Dr. Siebert to just get your comments on it. Do you think that continues in the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish? And I know we had, professionals get involved with how things were worded also. And we ask for their opinions. So if you could comment on that, I would appreciate it.
Certainly, Mr. Como. So, yes, as Mr. Clark mentioned, we did have school perceptions review the drafts of the survey that we had. We came out of the last F&F with essentially the big questions of would you be interested in a breakfast program and would you utilize a program if offered? And then we also thought we could ask if people had questions about it or if they had questions about if their family would qualify for free or reduced meals, which could include filling out forms, et cetera. It'd be nice to gather that information so we could support them as well. And in terms of the dates of the survey, I mean, those certainly can be adjusted. That would be fine. We just wanted to bring this back to some of the points that were made earlier, that it was asked for in the committee. It's fair to say that in the past, there has been some scrutiny around surveys. that we've done administratively. So we wanted to make sure that we were asking the questions that you wanted so that you were getting, ultimately, we'd get as a district and you'd get as a committee and the full board, the information that you want to make any decisions that you need to make. And then I guess the other thing I would say is we just need to be clear that breakfast at these 8 particular schools, no matter what program we've been in, so dating back prior to my tenure, when we were in the National School Lunch Program, with the exception of Saratoga, where it was offered for a period of time but not well utilized and then removed, has not been offered in those sites. So from our standpoint administratively, when you approved your motion in August, we fully assumed we were just going back to the program that we have been implementing during the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, at all times in the school district of Waukesha. So I think it's just important that we clarify that, and everybody understands. That's where we were coming from, Mr. Clark and I working together on it.
Appreciate that.
Just one clarifying question. Greg had mentioned a change to have it be for next school year, and then Joe kind of countered that, or thought the data would be good at any time. Am I doing the survey for next year, or is it, just I want to be crystal clear?
No, it'd be for this year, because the SSO is done in June.
Okay, I thought so, I just thought.
Yeah, and the legislation that kept it running didn't make it out of the Senate. So, unless something comes up, we can worry about that if they get some legislation moving in DC that would have breakfast free and lunch for everybody, because that was the original plan. Yes.
I mean, we could consider really looking forward. We don't have to look at this period of time.
Right, we could send this out. We could send it out before the school year, yeah. Right, no, for sure, we can definitely do that, but right now, I want to know how we would utilize SSO. Because, I mean, the game changes at June.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we don't even know how it's.
We are unclear, that is correct.
We don't have any guidance from federal government.
From the feds, right.
So,
yeah, the next year is totally up in the air on what the school lunch program is going to look like in the districts. All righty. So do you have the changes?
Mm-hmm.
Can you read them? Did it put you on the spot?
I have abbreviated, we'll pull up the video.
Okay.
In 2 places, we're adding no additional cost at this time. One was in, I believe, paragraph 2, and then number 2, the question number 2, switching it to, rather than free, at no cost at this time, at no additional cost at this time.
So it would read, if a breakfast program was offered to your child at your child's school at no additional cost to you, would your family utilize it?
Two families.
Families.
I think it's key to have the word family in there.
Yes.
Right? That's
No
originally what you
additional
had.
cost to families at this time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, we're good.
Ready? So I'll be looking for a motion then.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Montiel. Any further discussion? No. All right, so this will be going out, when is it going to go? We can change the dates, send it out as soon as we possibly can.
I don't know what the turnaround is, but it should be quick.
It should be, yeah.
I think it still needs to go with the full board.
Yeah, it does, but as soon, if
Wednesday?
it's approved on Wednesday, I'd like it out. We can make the changes to the survey tomorrow, so it could go out on Thursday. The survey's ready to go, I'm sure Steve or whoever's got it, in the chamber. Alrighty. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
4-1. Alrighty. That concludes our action items for the evening. Next up is discussion information item, monthly budget report.
In January, our revenues for our local sources were, our largest revenue source was our property taxes. We fulfilled our debt service fund taxes, so we're ready for our April payments, and that left an additional $9.6 million that went into the general fund. Right now, we are collecting the taxes very close to what we were at last year, so there's no nothing unusual with our cash flow with that. Interest continues to fall below our budgeted expectations, but student fees are ahead of where we were last year this time, so overall our revenue budget is on track for local sources. Interdistrict sources, we just continue to receive achieve tuition payments. Those are for students that are not part of the open enrollment. They're part-time enrollment students that pay to come and take a couple classes at eAchieve. They either pay through their family or their district approves for them to come here, and there is a tuition fee for that. Intermediate sources, we had a transitive aid payment from CISA in February. Basically what that means is the money that we pay CISA every year, in the following year they look at what money would have been aidable, and then CISA has to give us back a portion of the aid that they received for the money that we gave to them. That's typical, we do that every year. State sources, we just had our AGR, our second AGR payment. There's 3 payments in the year, and we had our second for $79,244. AGR is the program that was formerly SAGE, the Student Achievement Gap Reduction, and that is the program to reduce class size in our lowest income schools. Let's see. Other revenues we received, yay, finally, our refund from the Department of Workforce Development. So if you remember during the beginning of the pandemic, we had a lot of unemployment costs, and the federal government and the state, 50% was coming from the state and 50% was coming from the federal government to reimburse us for any unemployment costs that were related to COVID. And that we received a check for $930,000. We're still getting little credits coming in, but that we can use with our normal unemployment money, so that's a really good thing. Right now, we received 51.49% of our budgeted revenues compared to 47.69% last year at this time. I'm sorry, yeah, 47.69. Expenses, salary and benefits, as always, are our largest, and every month we do salary projections, and we're on target. We have no worries about where the budget's at. It'll come in where we expect it to be, maybe a little bit lower, but it compares well to the percentages that we were at last year. Purchase services, I feel like a broken record because it's pretty typical every month after month. We don't have a lot of variance every year, so. Top 3 areas of spending in February were personal services, utilities, and utilities. Personal services, again, this month was just a lot of small, minor purchases, no big purchases that made up those amounts. We spent 40.62% of our budget compared to 34.54% this time last year. That one, the percentages, it varies depending on when the purchases are just made throughout the year. Non-capital, we had $192,634 in expenditures in non-capital objects. Again, no major spends, just a lot of smaller purchases. We're at 53% of our spend versus 49% of last year. Very minimal spending in capital objects in February. I'm assuming everyone knows the difference between capital and non-capital. Capital is anything over $5,000. Okay. For a single item. Insurance, all the expenses in February were due to the South Pool damage, which we'll be getting claim money back on. No transfers this month. Their objects minimal, so right now our spending has come in at 44.67% of the approved budget. This time last year we were at 44.99% of our approved budget, so very close. Fund 27, which is our special education funding. We received our state categorical aid payment that comes throughout the year in several payments, $1.1 million. That was our main special education revenue for February, but we also did receive flow-through and preschool grant payments and Medicaid reimbursement rates. Expenses, really our main expense for special education is salary and benefits, and we're on target with where we expect to be. Purchase services is tuition to private schools, made up all of the purchase services. Supplies for the non-capital objects, no capital purchases. No insurance costs, no transfers. We're at 49.81% of our SPED budget, our special education budget, compared to 52.2% this time last year. Fund 43 was our referendum projects, and I think we've officially closed that out now. We spent all the money in there, and that will come off the report after this month, so that money is been utilized. Talked about the taxes already. The health and dental are both are a very healthy plan right now. We're still doing well. We're not seeing a large surge in claims. We had 1 month, but then it's leveled back off again, so we're in good position with both of those programs. Any questions?
Any questions about the monthly budget report? No, seeing none. Thank you, Sherry. Moving on is the long-range budget planning, Hatfield and Whittier Elementary merger.
We're going to bring up a slide that it's also board docs too.
Okay.
Or follow along in your laptop. So for the last couple of months, we've been talking about, actually several months, the long-range budget outlook for the district. And so we have one presentation, but really has two parts. The first part is me just walking through our overall budget position and going through the plan that we're recommending that be implemented to allow us to come in with a balanced budget. And then Joe and Jim will walk you through more detailed information on the proposed merger of Hatfield and Whittier Elementary. So if you want to advance the next one too. So we'll walk through just the financial part. Again, if I think I see a lot of familiar faces, the slide's been shared at every presentation we've done. And it talks about our displays, our third Friday enrollment counts, and the steady drop that we've seen for the last decade from 13,143 kids to 11,316 students. And that projection is set to continue for the next decade at least. Our projections go out to 2030. And those projection studies are on our website for anyone who wants to partake. I did, in their summaries, I did grab both a little snippet of the state forecast for student enrollment and then one for Waukesha specifically. And this is the state. And we use Applied Laboratory out of UW-Madison to come up with these projections, and we do it about every 5 years to stay pretty current. So on the state level, and this is a study that was completed in 19, presented to, I believe, this committee in 2020, our model suggests that there will be a decrease in total enrollment at the state level for the foreseeable future. In the near term, the majority of the decline will be in the middle schools, -5%, while elementaries will decline slightly less at 4.5%. In the next 5 years, high school enrollment will increase slightly and then begin a decline similar as the middle school. So they're projecting those smaller classes moving through the grades and eventually, and that's why the middle school has a little higher, I think, is some of those larger classes are still in the middle school grade range and they're moving through. So, and then for STW, they do 4 different projection models. That's one thing I like about their studies. They look at it 4 different ways. But all 4 projection, again, this is quoting the study, all 4 projection models project pre-K and through 12 enrollment decreasing for the foreseeable future. Elementary schools are likely to see the enrollment decrease in the near term because of declining birth and kindergarten enrollment. But middle school enrollment will likely see the most decline. Again, I think it's just they're in that transition phase, and that's why on a percentage basis, their decline is a little larger.
That screen is different. It's up here.
She's actually, oh, I'm sorry, Jess. I thought you were following along with me. Oh, I'm on 5. Yeah. So here are the snippets, and they're in the study. The summaries of each study are much lengthier, and I didn't want to project the entire study for you. So I just grabbed those 2 because they summarize what we've been talking about on an enrollment basis for the last several months, or actually several years, we've been talking about declining enrollment. The next slide is just a summary. So student enrollment, STW, resident enrollment is down 1,827 students since September of 2012. That's a 14% decrease. And as I mentioned before, that decrease is set to continue through 2030 based on our most recent study. And the enrollment studies have been pretty accurate. COVID kind of made it actuals to the study made it a little, they were off, but the overall trend from when COVID hit to where we're ending up, in year 2 or 3 of COVID, it's kind of coming back to where the study would have had us anyways. It was just a different path taken. The next slide is our enrollment projection, our revenue limit projection, which again is driven by enrollment. The top 2 lines is our actual historical 2020 or 2021. Our current fiscal year, and you can see the enrollments dropping from 12,300, this is a 3-year average, 12,311 students down to 11,720. And then what we're projecting for next year is a drop of another couple hundred kids. The state provides us, and this is the most basic and most important equation in school finance, about just over $10,000 per student per year. So as that number, the multiplier, the number of students goes down, multiplied by roughly $10,000, our revenue's decreasing. The next line is the per pupil increase. Oops. Oh, go back up, Jess. Thank you. The per pupil increase or decrease in 2020, 2021, the state provided us $179 per kid more in levy authority. The current biennial budget, and the state approves a 2-year state budget, the current year had no increase in per pupil revenue limit authority. And next year, we know, unless something changes legislatively, but they rarely come back to change the state biennial budget, is also going to be 0. Down in the middle of the page, we get into the exemptions that a steadily declining enrollment district like us get, the hold harmless, which guarantees no smaller than last year's base. So you can see in the blue line, that hold harmless exemption, which is a 1-year add-on and then it goes away, increased to $2.9 million. A lot of things involved there, but 1 year of COVID, we had a larger drop than we thought we would. And now you can see enrollment's kind of slowing, the pace of the decline is slowing, and that hold harmless exemption's dropping by about $900,000. The declining enrollment exemption seeing the same movement. We're losing $900,000 in revenue limit authority under that exemption. One thing that makes our revenue limit projection look a little better than it really is the private school voucher aid deduction. That's not revenue for us. The 3.7 in the blue column and then 4.3 million in the far right-hand column. The state essentially lets us do the bookkeeping for their voucher program. So they take the number of kids in our district that choose vouchers. They allow us to levy in the revenue limit authority, but then they bill us for the exact same amount at the end of the year, so it's a net 0. So some of that growth from 3.7 to 4.3 is making it look like we have revenue limit growth, but it's really our bill in our accounting of the voucher program is just going up steadily. In the next slide, we'll talk about the future years, and I kind of flatten it out because the whole voucher thing's new. And it's hard to predict something that's new, but that's important to point out. So we've had for the current year, a drop of $600,000 in revenue limit authority. Because of the variables above that I mentioned, the continued drop in enrollment, no increase in the per pupil multiplier or revenue limit authority, the decrease in the exemptions, we're looking at a revenue limit decrease of $3.4 million for the 22-23 school year. Next slide, Jess. Here's our projection going further out, and there's 4 columns here, so we're looking at 2 state biennial budget processes. There'll be a lot of elections during that time, a lot of issues, but we did our best to come up with a projection that I think is pretty fair. We took our average drop in enrollment of just over 1% and continued that out for all 4 years. Unlike the current state biennial budget, we put in $150 more per kid every year it's kind of an average. I don't know if it's a perfect average, but so this isn't a continuation of the state not offering any additional revenue to the school district. The exemptions and all those things eventually work themselves out within the formula, so that's not me saying that they're going to 0, it's just the way the calculation works. But you'll see in 23, 24, even with an additional $150 per student, we're looking to lose another $2.37 million in revenue limit authority. And then thereafter, it kind of flattens out. The decline in enrollment slows, the exemptions go away, so you don't have the or minimized, so you don't have the huge swings in aid. So we think, in essence, and Dr. Siebert kind of started using this phrase, and it makes a lot of sense, we're learning how to go from $130 million of revenue limit authority down to $125 million of revenue limit authority. That's the process we're in right now. The next slide is just kind of a summary. Now, we've talked a lot about our structural deficit, and I've had a lot of questions on that term. And in my mind, the structural deficit is every year we come in, revenues are growing at less than 1%, expenses are growing at 3%, compensation, health insurance, transportation, utilities, all those things have an inflationary factor. So there's always that gap, and I have a chart I'll show you in a minute here. But what's making this year more significant is that $3.4 million loss of revenue limit authority, coupled with a CPI that is expected to be, or is twice the average we've been seeing for an extended decades. And a projection that CPI might not get much better, if not maybe even a little worse the following year. So that's what's taking us from that normal structural deficit of $3 million to $4 million to 7 to 7.5, is we're losing so much revenue limit authority, and we're looking at so much increase in the cost of doing business. It's making that margin for this year grow. So again, the primary factors, enrollment. If you're interested in knowing how your school district is doing financially, look at your resident enrollment, and if it's steadily declining over a decade, you're probably having conversations very similar to what we're having. If it's growing, sometimes too much growth is not always easy either, but it's certainly a better position to be in. CPI again, and then no increase in per pupil funding at the state level in either year. Next slide, Jess. So this is, because we have gotten questions about what I termed as the structural deficit, this is the process we go through. So the blue line is, and this was just a hypothetical scenario I provided the board several months back. The blue line is saying, okay, let's say revenues grow at 0.75% per year, and expenditures are growing at 2.5%. Again, these are just numbers I plugged in for demonstration purposes. If we did nothing every year, we would have the blue line in the red, or orange, whatever color that is, we would have that margin, and it would just grow and grow and grow. But what we've done, and what school districts do, is we recognize that deficit prior to the fiscal year. We start working on a plan to either increase revenues where we can, even though we have limited options there, or reduce the budget through service reductions or budget adjustments. And then we lower it, and it's kind of a saw blade in the middle. We identify the trend, we bring it back with the red arrow that brings it down, and then we go into the next year, we're balanced, but then you apply that gap of 0.75 and 2.5 in the rate of expenditure and revenue growth. That's a gap, we lower it, we come back the next year, that gap is there again, and that's why I think this is a structural deficit. It's always there. You never get away with it. We start every conversation in a budget cycle about what's that gap going to look like. So that's why I use the term, and I don't know if that is how business school uses it, but to me, something that's built into your cycle every year is structural. So,
Mr. Como.
So that structural deficit, we have been in this situation for what, roughly 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
Where our administration has basically been coming up with how to close that gap. Well, why do we have to close that gap? We have to balance our budget every year. We're required by state law. And you can do it in a lot of different ways, but I mean, basically what it comes down to is you can either increase your revenues, where you said we're pretty limited, or you reduce your expenses. So our administration has been essentially coming up with ways to do this for 5 years. And I appreciate that, because back when I first got on the board, we used to do things differently. If we had a $3 million budget that we needed to close, we would have a list of about 5 million, and we would have conversations around this table, sometimes even over $500 items. And I think our educators are in the best position, our professional educators, administration, teachers. Those are the ones where we get the ideas from as to how to balance this budget every year. We're in a different scenario now, where we've been doing this for a long time, and now there are some larger decisions that just are not administrative decisions. And the one that we're talking about right now is a board decision. It's a merger of two elementary schools. So I know you'll probably talk a little bit more on that, but I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective that administration has been doing this really for 5 years now.
So for next year, for 22-23 fiscal year, we've come up with a list of budget adjustments or service reductions, however you want to phrase it, to balance the budget. And it's a combination of several things. One is the reduction of staff and services. One is looking at compensation for staff. We're also looking at the utilization of some Esser money and other revenue sources. And this all goes back to, we make a projection in December, and then we edit from there. So we're working from that number. And what I provide the board, just for people to know, is I look at how we've done business in the past and what's our maximum exposure. If you would ask me a year or two ago, would I have 4.7 CPI in a budget forecast, I would have said, no, there's no way. So we adjust off of that base. So what this is coming off of that forecast, the things that we think should be implemented. And oftentimes, we have some purview as administration to make changes, but other times there's big topics that we think need to come before the board. Health insurance is usually one, employee pay, a school issue like what we're talking about a little later. Those types of things at some point become a board decision in our mind. So I'll just walk you through. There's a couple slides of them. Each year, and we go through this naturally, a right sizing of teacher staff. We have fewer and fewer kids, so we go through and look at, especially at the high school level, where there's more options and choices, we allow the kids to select their courses, and then we go in and start looking at the staffing model to see if there's sections or staff that we can reduce. We've been very fortunate in this regard. In 5 years, and I'm looking for Joe to either, I don't believe we've laid off a teacher at all. It's all been done through attrition, and we think we're on our way to making that happen again. Is your recollection as well? I'm afraid there's one somewhere.
I believe there was one layoff in the last 5 years, but that turned out that the person had an opportunity to work for us after the layoff.
So that's right. So again, that's a normal part of the process. We've identified 10 FTE that would come from that. Health insurance, what we've normally done in budgeting for health insurance is say the district will take on a 5% increase, and anything above 5%, we will bring it back down through plan design changes. So what I said this year is, okay, instead of that, the target's going to be no change in health insurance. And I think we're developing a plan that's going to reach that goal, but that's the difference between 0 and 5%, $834,000. So the school closure, which we've talked about, we are budgeting a pay adjustment for salaried or district staff based on our 7-year average. Again, that's a final decision that'll be made through the HR committee up through the board. But this is our plan and ideas that we think can get us to a balanced budget. We have a few things here that might sound a little strange, but essentially what the next two items are is reducing capital improvement project funding for the district. It comes out about just over $500,000 in total. The next one is the reduction of a clerical staff person at the service building or the buildings and grounds department, the elimination of one maintenance staff member at the service building. Jess, can you forward? 1.5 administrative positions would be eliminated under this proposal. Instructional aides, we set a target here because aides is, a lot of it's driven by IEPs and things outside of our control, so we kind of just set a target of what we'd like to get to, would be the elimination of the equivalent of 10 5.75 hours per day aide positions. We have some full-time aides, we have some that work 2 hours a day, so they run the gamut, so really what you put out there is a fiscal target. And then we get into several central office department budgets. Business office, $150,000. That was part of funding that, if you remember, our referendum plan had some operational dollars going into it, referendum proceed dollars. That's eliminating that because the referendum projects are done. Reduced technology budget by $250,000. Student services, eAchieve is reduced. T&L, we're looking at reducing by $25,000. Reduce bus routes to reflect ridership. We're looking at 3 routes, and actually we think we've probably already incurred that savings this year. Our route number is significantly lower than it's been. Now, our kids coming back to ride more and all that, COVID, I hate blaming everything on COVID, but we'll have to see. 1 year of somewhat normal would be good to get a benchmark again. This is an idea that we threw out there, but I don't know if it has legs or not, is offer additional overloads to teaching staff, meaning you would pay a stipend to a secondary level teacher to teach an additional section of school. Again, this was a target that I threw out there for Sharon and I just to see, does it make sense? Is it viable? Would they occur in the right curriculum area where you would want to put an overload? So it was really just throwing something against the wall to see if it was going to work out or not. And again, that's a work in process. Jess, thank you. The next two are the utilization of Esser funds, learning recovery. And now, again, these are not to confuse the conversations that are happening in T&L right now, or didn't happen in T&L. This is actually just funding positions. I put in there learning recovery. That could be coaches, that could be things that we'd otherwise, without ESSER funds, would have to eliminate. I threw out summer school. It doesn't have to be these things. Summer school is nice because it's contained. We track it's one thing, it's easy to, but essentially what this is saying is we're going to use just over $1 million of ESSER funds to balance our budget. The next one's labeled state funding, but it's really part of federal funding. The governor was allocated in some federal legislation a pool of money that he has divvied out $133.72, and we'll actually receive it this year. Actually, I think we have received it this year. But what I'm suggesting we do is for the next 2 school years, and I split the total in half, so we got about $1.5 million, that we split it in 2 to help balance the next 2-year budgets to make us whole. And then flow-through grant was allocated additional dollars. We can charge 6% additional indirect cost to that, and that's an accounting function. So that's the list of things that are going on, and it's much lengthier than what we've seen in the past, but I thought it would be good to review it with the board or committee. Any questions on any of that?
Any discussion on budget balancing plan? Mr. Dietz.
Mr. Clark, could you tell us about the history of the fund balance over the last 2 or 3 years?
Sure. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we've gone up about, I believe it's $16 million in the last 5 years. And the first several years of that, we had what I would consider minimal increases in fund balance when you consider our size. But then in 2020, we had a $9.2 million in fund balance in that 1 year, and that was primarily due because we stopped operating as a school in March. I mean, at that time, we talked about it in this committee, we said we need to collect these resources because we don't know what's coming. We didn't know about ESSER 1, 2, or 3 at the time. So it did take a substantial bump, but the whole plan all along was we knew these larger, or we knew deficits were coming, not as large as it is this year, but that we would utilize those dollars at that time. Because I remember talking about, we need to stop thinking about a 12-month budget. We need to start talking about a 3-month, or 3-year budget, because we're going to have all these resources. And then last year, we had a similar, or not similar, a several $million add to our fund balance as well. But each time, especially in those early years, each time we added to fund balance, even if it was a small add, it was because we went through that process I talked about. We identified a deficit, we made adjustments, and we ended the year for the first, would that be 17 and 18, with a small add to fund balance. So the process worked those years, even the year with the $9.2 million add to fund balance. If we wouldn't have closed for COVID and we wouldn't have made the necessary budget adjustments, we would have ended in a deficit position that year, just like the 2 years prior to that. COVID makes the numbers go a little crazy, but we've also, the underlying gap in the growth rate of revenue and expenditures hasn't changed. We just have a pool of one-time money to address it for now. And I was going to add a slide, and I might do it for the board meeting. We traded on, in my mind, when Esser 3 came through, it gave the politicians in Madison the option of not funding us. We took one time, not that we had a choice, don't get me wrong, they didn't call and ask. They gave us a pool of all of government above us, gave us a pool of money and no ongoing revenue growth whatsoever. And that is great now, but in 3 years, 4 years, that's going to be something we're going to feel the impact, I think, for a long time. So that's, if I answered your specific question or not, but.
And our current fund balance would be what?
43 million? I believe it's 43 million.
Okay.
And keep in mind what makes up that number. First of all, it's an accounting equation. It's assets minus liabilities. It's not, I have $46 million sitting in the bank on that date. It also houses our reserves for our self-funded dental and health insurance programs. We've set aside dollars within there to help fund ongoing OPEB obligations of the district. We've funded textbooks this year, capital improvement projects in the past via fund balance. The dollars that allow us individual school to carry over unused budget dollars to use them the next year is also captured in that number. So there's a lot of pieces within that number, but it's just not all unassigned or not being utilized, so hopefully that helps.
So I guess you could see why the average person might struggle with the concept of structural deficit, but then our fund balance is increasing.
Mm-hmm. No, I do, because the average person out there doesn't know about our budget reductions. And that's part of that was, I guess, in hindsight, might have been a bad move not to have those meetings that Joe was talking about, because that's when, as you've lived through those, Greg, that's when people find out what's on the list. They fill the boardroom, and that's not a bad thing. They deserve a voice. But we moved away from that because it was also hard on everybody involved.
And, sometimes the media, I think, projects our district as being in financial difficulty and financial stress. Well, in actuality, I think we're doing quite well.
I do too, and I think, some of the emails I've gotten, and I appreciate the feedback I've gotten on this, because they've been very good questions, but to me, it speaks to our process, our willingness to identify challenges, to address them, and move forward. But it's all, like I said before, it's always there. So I get where people look at that and say, we're doing really well. I wish we weren't doing really well with one-time money for the long haul. I wish it was ongoing funding. But I certainly understand the perception, but the fund balance, especially during the year of COVID, and just talk about that in particular, the numbers are so weird right now. Money hitting one year and coming in the next, and then you get allocation from the feds on this and that. But to me, it speaks to our ability to manage our finances and identify what I consider to be a structural deficit, and to work through them without a knee-jerk, operational referendum question is the only way we can do it. I don't think that's fair either, so.
So you wouldn't agree that that's an accurate assessment that some people have, that our district is not financially sound?
No, I think we are. But we're also to be beholden to people who control half of the ledger, the revenue side, so. But I think we've held to a process. It might not have been perfect, but I think it shows benefits that we're sitting here with this kind of fund balance rather than being essentially broke 12, 15 years ago.
Right. Because I know that wasn't during your time, but I think at that time it was hardly anything in fund balance, and it was just barely getting by.
I would say accounting-wise, we were broke in the late 2000s, 2008, 9, 10. And then in the 90s, I remember, I want to say 98, we had a $300,000 or $325,000 fund balance for a district our size. So the other thing that fund balance do, and I shouldn't skip this, is we don't have to cash flow borrow anymore, especially with interest rates ticking up. The cost of borrowing money, I think, based on what you hear, is going to be going up. So our ability to cash flow our own operation is stopping that list from being larger than it already is.
Does that also help with our bond rating?
Yes. Yep. Which we have a very good one, by the way.
Mr. Como?
I'd just like to maybe see if I can put this into, look at this a little different way. So fund balance, some people call it the rainy day fund. And, you just listed a myriad of things where we have monies in reserve, Darren. And we're self-funded health insurance-wise, so on and so forth. If you were to subtract all those out, what do you think the unassigned is? Roughly.
I want to say between retirement, health insurance, I would say that's, just those two is probably $9 million between the reserve fund balance for those two.
Okay. So we have 35-ish unassigned. Would that be, just for sake of
I think for the sake of this conversation.
All
we
I'm
use that
trying to
number.
do is to put this in perspective for people. It costs us about $1 million a day to run our business, roughly. If you take our total budget with everything, everything, it's not, maybe not quite $1 million, but, and, we do run services differently during the summer. Would you say it's roughly $1 million? Is it a little bit less than $1 million?
If you're talking just the operational budget, it's a little less than $1 million for every day of school for certain.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to simplify this a little bit. So it's not 100% accurate what I'm going to say, but, essentially, our rainy day fund would keep us afloat for about a month, roughly, just to kind of put it in perspective so that, when I take a look at my own personal finances, how long can I last if I lose my job and my wife loses her job? What does that look like? So although this is many millions of dollars, it's still not a lot. We fall within, when you take a look at what our auditors ask us to shoot for, it should be 15 to 25%. I think I even asked this last year. I don't know if it was this last time or year before. I think it was the year before. Do we fall within an acceptable amount? And they're saying yes. And I just want to reiterate a number that I shared with people at this meeting several times throughout the years. It's really important that we don't do a short-term borrow, or if we can avoid it, to do that. What does that mean? What that means is we have enough cash, now literally cash in the bank, to be able to get through the year without having to borrow money, okay? We used to have to borrow money, and I think the highest we ever had to borrow was $27 million. And that was back in the early 2000s to mid-2000s. And I recall that we had the interest on that short-term borrow would be $500,000 to maybe $950,000. That's I don't know, 8 to 12 teachers a year if we had to spend that money. So I'm just trying to put this in perspective for people Why did our bond rating go up? Well, it's partially because of this reserve. Well, why? Because we have a rainy day fund. When we hit bumps, we can fix them. But again, this is more like one-time spending money, and it's not going to fix more of the long-term structural deficit kinds of problems. Those monies, I think, should be used for very specific reasons. And what would you say those reasons would be, Darren?
Well, ideally, what you learn in business management school is one-time money for one-time expenditures. That's the de facto thing you learn. I don't know if we're in that place. That's why we're recommending the use of, over $1 million of Esser. If you factor in what the governor's providing, you're talking $1.8, $1.9 million of one-time money, 1 or 2 year kind of money. So it's not perfect, but with the size of reductions that we're looking at, I didn't think that was the right path for now. But for me, it's construction projects, it's textbooks, I say textbooks, and I know some of them are virtual or electronic, so I use it as a general term. Those are close to one-time expenditures, they last a long time, those types of things. But ultimately, it's the things we don't see that are coming. Obviously, with self-funded health insurance, if you want to dive into that, because there's some risk that comes with that financially as a school district, you want to make sure you have the reserves in there to take on the bad years. And we've had a few good years, oddly, during COVID. A pandemic's lowering our experience, which seems backwards. But you want to have those reserves because I think 4 years ago or 5 years ago, we pulled $1 million out of reserves to cover our claims. So those are the types of things that, off the top of my head, that I would.
So if we didn't have enough reserves, for, let's say, for our health care claims, could we borrow money would we want to borrow money? So that's what we're trying to get at, is we don't want to borrow money for those kinds of one-time.
I think that's a path to a worse situation.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Darren, would it be helpful to share where we're at with the board policy of fund balance, or no?
Yeah, we're
within.
Yeah, why don't you share it?
Okay.
Yep.
So our board policy for fund balance requires that of the 3 categories of fund balance, committed, assigned, and unassigned, that we carry 15 to 25% of the prior year's general fund and special education fund expenditures. So we came into this year at 23.91%. So we're within the board policies of where it's expected to have a fund balance.
Ms. Como.
And I remember taking a vote on that board policy. I'm sure you do too. It was probably one of the more important fiscally sound policies that we ever passed. I mean, again, we had just a few $100,000 in our fund balance, our rainy day fund. That was pretty unacceptable in my mind. So this has forced us to help us to be more fiscally responsible, in my opinion.
Mr. Dietz.
Mr. Clark, we paid off our 10-year referendum in 6 years?
We're on pace to, I think we've made 3 of the 6 payments, or will, in April. But we're on pace for a 6-year payback.
Instead of 10, okay. And then is the savings from that, where does that go, or how is that floated within a budget somewhere?
Yeah, what we've talked about in terms of the budget deficit and everything is in our Fund 10, our operational budget. That's where most of our costs are, $150 million worth of costs. Fund 39 is where you pay back essentially what our mortgage is, and what you levy into Fund 39 to make payments has to be spent on Fund 39. So the interest savings, and I forget how much we've saved since what we talked about in theory leading up to the referendum, but it's, I want to say, millions of dollars. There's a web page out there for anyone who wants to confirm that number. But really, it's true savings, because an interest cost you never incur, you never have to pay back. You know, it doesn't show on our statements because it's invisible, right? There's no, so our savings, and for a district to borrow $60 million, even as large as we are, and pay it back in 6 years, I think is a pretty unique, even when, I believe it was Mr. O'Brien who said we should go for a 10-year borrow, I thought, ooh, I wasn't too sure on that, but then once we dove into it, it works, and the taxpayers, I think, identify, that's one thing about debt, as much as school finances is foreign language for 99.9% of the people understand the mortgage, they understand debt, I think they understand prepayment and buying down your obligations. So I think it's been received because there is that general, oh yeah, that makes sense. And we're doing that all while our tax rate continues to drop. And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but so it made the process easier compared to a tax rate that's moving in the opposite direction to try to do what we're doing.
Thank you.
Any other discussion?
So the second half is a presentation on more specific to the merger. And again, this is the Finance and Facilities Committee, so we're focusing on numbers to this point. But I think Jim's going to lead us through, and with Joe's help, the rest of the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind, Jess is advancing the slides for us.
Yes. All right. So we can move, Jess. This is just a review of the slide that Darren had showed you previously, and the fact that we are looking at in the $7 million budget shortfall range is the reason we're talking about this particular merger as a piece of that overall budget solution. And overall, it's an attempt to help us have some significant discussions around some very difficult topics to get us to that $5 million less of revenue limit authority in the future. So we're going to have these types of discussions for the next 2 to 3 budget cycles. And Darren had already reviewed with you why we're having those. In light of that, we administratively have put together the plan that Darren previously displayed for you. And really, when we think about the declining enrollment, that triggers us to think about the footprint of the district and how many schools do we truly need when we see where the enrollment is going. And ultimately, what we talked about as a cabinet is if we keep the number of facilities that we have while the enrollment declines and we have the financial challenges, we will in time provide fewer services and programs at all of those locations. Conversely, if we start to take steps now and over the next couple of budget cycles to right-size our district, we believe we can maintain, if not even enhance, the services and programs that we provide at fewer locations. And go to the next one, Jess. Some of the things that we administratively like about the merger of Whittier and Hadfield is the fact that we could get to a 3-section elementary school. So when we say 3-section, that means 3 classrooms of kindergarten through 5th grade. We would have 2 classes of 4-year-old kindergarten. What that allows you to do is have full-time specialist teachers, such as Phy-Ed, music, art. Currently in both of those buildings, because of the lower enrollment, we have traveling staff, which isn't nearly as efficient in terms of providing services to the students and having those staff and those adults there all of the time. We believe the next 2 bullet points, we think we can better meet the needs of students under one roof, and we think we can also better support our staff under one roof with them working together. The example we've been using is 5 special education teachers at Whittier, 5 at Hadfield, put them together into a team of 10, and you really provide some additional support and collaborative opportunities for those adults. And we believe we can do all of that while still garnering those financial efficiencies that Darren talked about earlier. We're also excited about the fact that a larger school population in a Hadfield could help us develop a more stable before and after school care program. We've already had some conversations with the Y. We've had some conversations with Park and Rec. We also have a grant that for our community learning center that Whittier and Brandy have applied for that they'll learn if they get in July that would help us. And ultimately we could look and see if the district ourselves, if we can't piece that all together, could offer some type of program. That it would be much more beneficial with a larger student population. It's difficult when you have smaller school populations that Dr. Cook we'll talk about that we currently have. He'll also talk about what student transportation is going to look like. We have some new ideas on our pay-to-ride option that we want to share with the committee this evening to make that more affordable for all of our families across the district, as well as in this particular situation. And then we'll also talk later about how we would reopen the school choice window should the board approve this merger for a 2-week period from March 11th to March 25th. Let me go to the next one. And now I'll give it over to Dr. Cook.
So over the last several months, we did conduct a facility study to look at the capacity of our buildings. So the chart that you have in front of you, we've presented this at the listening sessions. It shows our capacity by elementary, middle, and high school level. And on it, you can see the variance in the far right column of the amount of space that we have at our elementary schools, at our middle schools, and our high schools. Currently, the schools that are shaded gray, Blair, Harvey Phillip, Pleasant Hill, and White Rock, are mostly offline for us or leased. So Pleasant Hill is currently leased to the Richardson School. White Rock currently houses 116 students, but Blair and Harvey Phillip are empty right now. So in total, we have space in our district for an additional 4,147 kids, or 28.2% of our capacity. Could you advance, please? Thank you. Particular to the Hadfield and Whittier attendance area, if you go back, Darren presented a slide early on that showed where our enrollment was 10 years ago. In particular to Hadfield and Whittier, the enrollment of Hadfield was 411 and Whittier was 352 10 years ago. Currently this year, Hadfield has 215 students and Whittier has 192. So you can see that over the last 10 years, we have additional space at the school for 356 students, or about 46% of the space at those schools. We have that availability right now. Could you advance, please? Our capacity was also studied, and this breaks down to the attendance area. Hadfield has the capacity for 549 students and Whittier for 408. Our current enrollment, again, you can see that at 215 and 192. So at Hadfield, we have space for an additional 334 students. At Whittier, an additional 216 students. And then between the area, there's space for another 550 students in these two attendance areas. So you can see again that there's a lot of space in these buildings. Just for some perspective, this study was conducted to try to target 85% fill rate in the building, meaning that at any given time, only 85% of the building was being used. So that's not at true 100% capacity. We wanted to have space for breakout sections, student needs a group, staff meetings, staff professional development. So please know that in those numbers, there is still some space, capacity at those schools. In advance now, please. And again, as Darren presented earlier, the 10-year decline over our district, you can see where that decline has happened at both Hadfield and Whittier in those attendance areas.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Cook. It's back to me. So ultimately, our administrative recommendation that we'll be talking about again on Wednesday evening is to merge Hadfield and Whittier for next school year. And they would be housed at Hadfield. We'll talk in the next slide why we believe Hadfield is a better fit. As I mentioned earlier, the school choice window would reopen for parents to make a decision, and Dr. Cook actually had a slide at our last presentation that showed the various opportunities that we have in the grade levels across the elementary schools across the district. And I believe that'll be part of our presentation on Wednesday. We'll actually have the principals here for the full board meeting as well to be part of this presentation. And then lastly, we would merge the current attendance boundaries of Whittier and Hadfield going into next school year as well. So why we are recommending Hadfield, as Dr. Cook just pointed out, it's a larger facility. It has more room, more instructional spaces, and with combining what would be 407 students, if we just rolled all of those kids forward, the 215 and the 192, we would fill it at 75%. So that gives us room for all of the additional spaces that Dr. Cook talked about, as well as future growth. Hadfield, being a two-story building, has an elevator that makes it accessible to all of our staff and our students. And what really excites us about Hadfield as well is that it's air-conditioned. And part of what we want to really think about with this merged school is robust summer school programming that could take place certainly in an air-conditioned facility, and all of Hadfield, with the exception of the gym, has climate control or air conditioning. So in this next slide, really we're just trying to give you a high-level overview of some of the things that we have talked about in terms of the design of the school as well as the instructional program. I also want to just thank you all for being part of those listening sessions. So some of this is absolutely review, we understand. We are recommending a two-principal model. So on Wednesday night, both Mike Elliott, the principal of Hadfield, as well as Brandy Hart, the principal of Whittier, will be here to talk about their vision for the school. We believe that having a two-principal model is essential to help that school be successful from day one. We have an AGR grant that Sherry talked about earlier that stands for Achievement Gap Reduction, the former SAGE grant. That is at Whittier. That can transfer to the merged school at Hadfield, as well as their title funding can be combined. We're excited, as I talked about earlier, about stockpiling all of the resources and all of the staff at one site to really wrap around kids and the families. We're excited about that robust summer school programming. We have some ideas where we could make that programming longer and different than we have in other schools for summer school to really address some of the gaps that we see. And Brandy and Mike will talk additionally on Wednesday night about some of their vision around Bridges as their math curriculum, as well as additional phonics time for some of the gaps they see in developing young readers. The next two bullet points are really talking about the culture that we have to create. We have some really dedicated and inspired educators at both Hadfield and at Whittier, and we think bringing them together, they've already done some professional development work together last year, and should the board consider this and approve this on Wednesday, we can do a tremendous amount more team building already this spring into the summer, getting them ready for the fall. We can also do some work with the students in bringing them together that Brandy and Mike will talk about on Wednesday. I talked earlier about the before and after school programming. Those conversations are ongoing with various community groups as well as within the district. And then really what we think is critically important, and the principals have done a nice job of this already, is they have running Google Docs where the staff is contributing ideas, asking questions. This obviously is a major change, and this is a significant recommendation. And so to the extent that we can have kids involved, families involved, staff involved in planning some of the aspects of the school, we think is absolutely critical. So we'll continue to talk about that, and you'll get a lot more detail, as well as your board colleagues will, on Wednesday night from the two principals. This is going to go back now to Dr. Cook.
Thank you. So we've had a number of conversations around transportation. We spent a lot of time studying it, where it's at in this proposed attendance area. First off, we do base all of our transportation decisions off of a 2-mile walking rule. We've talked about that. That is a statutory guideline for us to use for transportation. We will and have studied the area using our unusually hazardous transportation plan. Excuse me. We've reviewed that in a couple of areas. There's a couple spots where transportation will be provided due to a lack of sidewalks or the type of intersection that kids would have to cross. As we talked about at Les Paul, for instance, anything west of West Avenue is now a bus area, a proposed bus area, and then almost everything south of Sunset falls into a proposed bus area. We'll have to review that again most specifically after people have made their selections around schools, which school they want. So to say we're going to have exactly 160 students on buses, I can't tell you that right now because I don't necessarily know where everybody's going to come from. But we're estimating right now that if, based off of who lives where, if all of the students went to the Hadfield campus, Hadfield School, we would go from transporting this year approximately 90 students between Hadfield and Whittier to next year transporting nearly 160. So this decision would open more students up to qualify for transportation right out of the gates. We're also proposing adjusting our pay-to-ride rates, and this would be district-wide. The $260 amount you see there right now is the standard rate if you don't qualify for free and reduced lunch. So anybody who wants to access pay-to-ride, $260 if you don't qualify for free and reduced lunch. We're proposing for families that qualify for reduced lunch to go from $195, which is the current rate, down to $130. And for any family that qualifies for free lunch, The current rate is $130. We're proposing that goes down to $65. So at $130, it's approximately $3 a week for transportation. At $65, it's approximately $1.50 a week to access pay-to-ride if a family wants to do that. We currently charge $65 for each additional child, or we charge a full rate if siblings are going to a different school. So if I have two children both going to the same school, it would be $65. But if they go to different schools, we'd be back to that $130 or whatever it might be. We're proposing for any additional child in the district that it'd pay a rate of $35. We recognize that families were hit hard with COVID, that had an impact on families. We know that we have families outside of the Whittier and Hatfield attendance areas who have needs, and we're proposing an adjustment to try to benefit them the best we can.
Take this. And then we've talked about, actually, most of these are things we've talked about for Hatfield leading up to this conversation. We have estimated costs for the following projects to be completed this summer. Playground equipment replacement, hallway and gym flooring replacement, classroom technology upgrades, which we've been doing. It's an ongoing process with this many schools. You're always doing 1 or 2 schools a year. So we're moving Hatfield because they're pretty much due for this upgrade regardless. The PA system within the school, we've been in the process of replacing PA systems because ours are simply aging out. So a lot of these projects are ones that would occur with or without the merger. But one of the reasons I'd like to get them all done this summer, if we can, is if we do move to a more robust summer school, my Buildings and Grounds Department access to the building in summer is going to be shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, so we'd like to knock out these projects. The estimated cost, as I think I mentioned, was $360,000, and we have at least initial quotes just to get budget numbers on all of these items now, so I think that's a pretty good dollar amount.
And then our last slide is one that we've shown at the end of all of our presentations with just our overall timeline. And we've had 3 community listening sessions, one at Whittier, one at Hatfield, and then a combined one at Les Paul. In each of those cases, we did the staff at 4 on both February 3rd at Whittier and then February 14th at Hatfield, 4 p.m. And then we did the parents and community members at 6. I just want to say those were very well attended, and we appreciated everybody that came out, shared their perspectives, and shared their feedback with us. Ultimately, we're coming to the end of that timeline, and so we're here on March 7th at FNF, and this will be on the agenda, as you've seen, for Wednesday evening for the full board meeting. So with that being said, we just thank you for listening, and we're happy to answer any questions, which is our last slide.
Does anybody have any questions for administration? Anything? Mr. Dietz.
The proposed attendance area for Whittier and Hatfield would be a pretty large chunk of property, right?
Yeah, it is there's a large footprint within those. There's a good segment of that, though, just for perspective, that is commercial, where there aren't houses in that area, so, but it does have a big footprint, yes.
Do we have any idea what the generated tax revenue for that attendance area would be? Or is that something that we could get?
Yes, I have that. And maybe I can find it. Well, if you have another question, that would be awesome.
That was my question.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And we pulled, this is 2018 property valuation data, just so you know. I don't know if you want to add an inflationary factor on that. Hatfield property value wise has $4 billion with a B dollars of property assessed value, and Whittier has 2.5, almost 2.6 billion. Again, a lot of commercial, a lot of dense housing, a lot of front doors, I guess. And if you just applied our rate, our tax rate for this year against that property valuation, it would be $47 million of tax revenue. But again, the merger is not changing that. That property's still in our school district. Those tax dollars still come to us. We're just reassigning it a different attendance area, just like any other boundary change. But those were the rough numbers that we came up with. We didn't go through every house to make sure we had it to, but I think this is a pretty close representation.
So it'd be roughly 25% of our budget, or our collected revenue, generated revenue? Maybe not quite 25.
Actually, a little more than that, I would say. Just the operational fund would be about a third of that. But again, we're not losing that revenue as part of this decision or consideration.
Right. That's a lot of revenue for one school, though. I mean, one school attendance area.
Yeah, just so people who may be watching this and wondering, Whittier is attendance area. You have the Sunset commercial area. Hadfield, you can tell by the valuation difference, has the Target and Panera and Buffalo Wild Wing, all those places over there, that whole section. I forget the name of that road that curves around there, but all of that is in Hadfield, so that's a lot of, compared to a boundary like a Hawthorne or a Blair that has little or no commercial. So it's not unusual, because commercial development's usually done in clusters, right? Or close together in sections, so it's not unusual, I don't think, to have that in balance. But yeah, it's, as the boundaries are, drawn today, it's capturing a lot of that.
I got confused. I got confused with the statement. Hadfield boundaries extend out to the commercial property on, at Target? Hadfield.
That's the map I have. I don't have the electronic map up, but again, the trade-off of the commercial is there's no kids, right?
And I guess I'm thinking more of the residential areas, so,
Right. Mainly their population areas. Goes out to the bypass to the east and.
Right.
Down Century, that's all commercial. Then you hit the Saratoga, then you got the cemeteries in there.
Yeah, keep in mind Saratoga doesn't have an attendance boundary.
Sure.
Yep, they don't have an attendance boundary. It was folded in.
Gotcha. That explains, because that was part of the merger with, when we put together STEM. The Saratoga rolled over, we had to redivide that up. Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Would you like to see
Sure.
an attendance area?
Yeah. Gotcha.
So this was a map that we used in our planning around the walk area.
In that.
And you can see that the area in pink there, or purple, where you see the Les Paul, Arcadian, that represents what would be within a proposed walk area. Again, this isn't final. We did this back on February 24th, so we were still working on this at this time. So you can see exactly where some of those boundaries exist around the current Hadfield attendance area.
Yep. I just had to shake my memory a little bit as to when that got added onto Hadfield, and that got added onto Hadfield when Saratoga was no longer a neighborhood school. It became part of our STEM, one of our 2 STEM campuses. Got it. I don't have the boundaries memorized, so.
So there's also old maps laying around, so sometimes you may.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Joe. Thanks for bringing that up.
Ms. Reincheck?
Thank you. I just have a question about the aides. If I hear anything in the community, it's, we need more aides, at least from aides themselves or teachers. And I'm wondering if that Esser, so I was surprised to see that, but the Esser Learning Recovery, would that help with those when you were talking about just having additional people? Would they be aides? Would they be helping in the classroom in that way? Maybe called something else, but would they be filling those positions?
There could be aides in there, but what I was talking about was coding someone to Esser's, meaning that job would be lost. But we could code aides there. But I don't know if it would necessarily, because the first $1 million of Esser we used to balance next year's budget. It has to be savings. It can't be adding those aides back, because then we're fighting against ourselves.
Just with that, that first one with the fund existing positions, I didn't know.
And we haven't defined that. Those could be aides.
Okay.
The aides, this is early for that group, because either they're special ed aides tied to IEP, or they're in the kinder grades tied to, how many kids are in a classroom and all that. So it's hard to, that's why we usually just kind of throw out block numbers, because it's just a hard group to plan way ahead on.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much. All righty. Next up is the Esser Fund update.
Yeah, this is just an update. T&L did they meet last week, I believe, right? And they approved the next we talked about Esser and how we want it to work and how the process should go. So I just put this on the agenda for tonight. And if you look at the attachment, I put T&L's action, even though the board hasn't approved it, just so you could see what this document will end up looking like. But kind of a running total, we have a category which we can, column where we can provide a dashboard at some point. So learning recoveries, all the T&L things, COVID response, there was 2 small things that for this year we budgeted for the tracer and the mobile hotspots. And then there's that amount I talked about for the budget allocation. Then down below is Esser 3. Again, we have to hit that 20% threshold for teaching and learning. So this is, I hope to draw some visuals out of this data, but I thought this was something I would put on FNF just so you can see exactly where we are as we proceed through many more months of probably discussing how to utilize those. So, and I don't have Esser 1 on here because that's been expended, so hopefully that's all right. But.
All right, any questions about the Esser 2 and 3 possible spending? Mr. Dietz.
Mr. Clark, did we reach our 20% mark, our minimum mark of spending Esser funds for learning recovery?
Yeah, within this, and we just kind of, we got close to the things I put under 3. You could bring any of those that are in 2 down there to hit that mark.
Okay.
So we just kind of got close for display purposes, but yeah, we're certainly there. And again, that's a floor.
Right.
Just so everyone's clear on that, we're not tied to that number.
A minimum. Yep.
So I was just there to see if that meets everyone's needs and tracking Esser.
Any other questions about the Esser 2 and 3 possible spending? All right. Thank you much, Darren. Next up on the agenda is other business recommendations for future committee meetings. Does anybody have any recommendations moving forward? Anybody? Anybody? Okay. If you do, email Darren and I, and we'll get it on the agenda. All righty. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting.